Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are talking all about how organisms get the fuel they need to survive.
You mean like food?
Exactly.
Mm.
From the smallest bacteria to the largest whales, everything's got to eat.
Or at least get nutrients somehow.
Yeah, that's what we're diving into today. The amazing diversity of ways that life on Earth gets the energy it needs to keep on living.
It really is remarkable when you think about it. Every single living thing needs to take in nutrients
Break them down.
and use them to build their bodies and do all the amazing things that life does.
Right.
So we'll be exploring all sorts of wild feeding mechanisms out there and breaking down the essential role digestion plays in all of this.
Yep.
I'm excited to get into it.
Me too. We're going to be talking about some really cool stuff today.
Yeah.
Things like the difference between heterotrophs and autotrophs.
Oh, yeah, I remember those terms from biology class.
And we'll be looking at different types of digestive tracts.
Okay.
And even exploring the intriguing difference between intracellular and extracellular digestion.
Sounds like a lot to cover. It is, but it's fascinating stuff, trust me.
All right, well, let's start with the basics. How do organisms obtain their food?
Great question. At the most fundamental level, we can divide organisms into two categories, heterotrophs and autotrophs.
Okay, those terms are ringing a bell, but can you remind me what they mean?
Sure. Imagine you're walking through a forest and you see a deer peacefully munching on some leaves. That deer is a heterotroph.
So it needs to eat other living things to survive.
Exactly. Heterotrophs, like animals and fungi, can't produce their own food.
So they have to get their energy by eating other organisms.
Right, like that deer getting its energy from the plants it eats.
We do the autotrophs.
You got it. Autotrophs, like plants and algae, are like little food factories. They have this incredible ability to create their own food from inorganic matter.
Yeah, like through photosynthesis,
Right.
using sunlight to turn water and carbon dioxide into sugars.
Precisely. They're the primary producers in most ecosystems, the foundation of the food chain.
That's pretty amazing. But hold on a second. It's not just plants that can do this, right?
You're thinking of chemosynthetic bacteria.
Yes.
They're another type of autotroph, but instead of sunlight, they use chemical energy to produce their own food.
And they live in some pretty extreme environments,
Right.
like deep sea vents where there's no sunlight.
Exactly. It's a testament to the incredible diversity and adaptability of life on Earth.
Wow, life finds a way. So we've got our producers, the autotrophs, making their own food.
Yep.
And then we've got the consumers, the heterotrophs, like us humans, who rely on eating other organisms for energy.
Right.
Okay, so what about us heterotrophs? What are the essential things that we need to get from our food?
All organisms need 6 essential nutrients.
6. Okay, lay it on me.
They are water ions, vitamins, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of.
But each one plays a crucial role in keeping our bodies running smoothly.
Okay, so let's break those down. Water is pretty obvious, right? I mean, our bodies are mostly water.
Absolutely. It's essential for countless bodily functions.
And then there are ions. Those are important for things like nerve impulses and muscle contractions, if I remember correctly.
You got it. They're also involved in maintaining fluid balance.
And what about vitamins?
Vitamins are like those tiny but mighty helpers that our bodies need for all sorts of processes.
They're involved in everything, from immune function to bone health.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got water ions and vitamins, and then we've got the macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins.
Right. Carbohydrates are our primary source of energy. They provide that quick fuel for our cells.
So like when I need a burst of energy to power through my workout.
Exactly. And then fats are a more concentrated source of energy and also important for insulation and protecting our organs.
Interesting. So they're like a long-term energy storage system.
You could say that. And finally, we have proteins, which are the building blocks of our bodies.
Yeah, those are the ones that build our muscles and tissues, right?
That's right. Proteins also act as enzymes, which speed up chemical reactions in our bodies.
So we've got our basic nutrients covered. And we know that heterotrophs, like us, get those nutrients by eating other organisms.
Right.
But the animal kingdom is incredibly vast and diverse. I can only imagine the variety of ways that creatures have evolved to actually catch and consume their food.
You're absolutely right. The diversity of feeding mechanisms in the animal kingdom is truly mind-boggling.
And I bet it's often directly related to an organism's size and the type of food it consumes.
You're catching on quickly. For example, think about filter feeders.
Oh yeah, like those giant whales that strain tiny creatures from the water.
Exactly. Like the blue whale, the largest animal on Earth, despite its immense size, its diet consists mainly of tiny crustaceans called krill.
Wait, how can something that massive survive on such small creatures?
That's where its baleen plates come in. They're these long fringed structures that hang from the whale's upper jaw,
Okay.
and they act like a giant sieve. The whale swims through krill-rich waters, takes in massive gulps, and the baleen traps the krill while letting the water flow back out.
So it's like a super efficient built-in filter system.
Precisely.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But filter feeding isn't just for giants, right? I remember learning about other animals that do it too.
You're right. Think about clams and oysters. They're also filter feeders, but on a much smaller scale.
So they must be filtering even tinier organisms.
Exactly. They use their gills to filter microscopic organisms from the water.
It's all about finding a strategy that works for your size and your environment.
That's nature's way.
Okay, so we've talked about filter feeders, but what about other feeding strategies? What about creatures that feed on fluids?
Ah, yes, the fluid feeders. Now we're getting into the realm of mosquitoes and leeches. These guys are the piercing and sucking experts.
Oh, those guys. I can definitely do without mosquitoes. They always seem to find me.
They have those specialized mouth parts perfectly designed to penetrate their prey or host and extract fluids like blood or plant sap.
It's both fascinating and a little creepy how they do that.
And to make matters worse, they even produce anticoagulants to keep those fluids flowing.
Oh, I know that feeling. Well, are there any other fluid feeders that are particularly interesting?
Well, let's not forget the tapeworm. This creature takes the easy way out when it comes to dining.
Oh, how so?
It lacks a digestive system entirely,
What?
and it simply absorbs nutrients directly from its host's intestines. Talk about a shortcut.
That's kind of freaky, but also incredibly efficient in a way. It's like having a built-in chef who pre-digests your food for you.
It's definitely a parasitic lifestyle, but highly effective in its own way.
That's wild. And speaking of pre-digesting food, have you ever heard of how spiders eat?
Oh, yes. They're masters of external digestion.
What does that mean?
Instead of digesting food inside their bodies like most animals, they inject enzymes into their prey to liquefy it before they suck up the resulting nutrient-rich soup.
So they basically pre-digest their meals before they even eat them.
Precisely. It's a fascinating adaptation.
It really is. So we've seen how the need to eat has driven all sorts of amazing adaptations in the animal kingdom.
Absolutely.
But what happens after an organism is actually taken in its food? That's where digestion comes in, right?
You got it. Let's unpack the fascinating process of digestion. So digestion is basically the process of breaking down the food you eat into smaller, simpler molecules that your body can actually absorb and use.
Okay, so it's kind of like taking a complex Lego structure and turning it back into those individual bricks.
Exactly. A great analogy. And this whole disassembly process happens thanks to the digestive tract.
Okay, so let's talk about this tract. What is it exactly?
Well, it's not really a tract in the traditional sense. It's more like a one-way tunnel.
Okay, a tunnel for food.
Got it. Yeah, many animals, including us humans, have what's called an open tube digestive system.
Open tube.
Yeah, so picture a tube with a mouth at one end and an anus at the other.
Makes sense so far.
Food enters through the mouth, travels through this tube, getting broken down and absorbed along the way, and any undigested waste exits through the anus.
Ah, so it's like a continuous process from start to finish. Food goes in, it gets processed, and then whatever's left over comes out the other end.
You got it.
But I'm guessing not all creatures have this open tube setup.
You're right. Some organisms, like the hydra, have a closed tube digestive system.
Closed tube. So what's the difference?
Well, with a closed tube system, there's only one opening that serves as both the mouth and the anus.
Oh, wow. So food goes in and waste comes out the same way.
Exactly. It's like a two-way street for food and waste.
Interesting. Seems a bit less efficient, but hey, it works for them.
Different strokes for different folks, right?
Right. So we've got the tube concept down, whether it's open or closed.
Okay.
But how does the actual breakdown of food happen inside this tube?
That's where things get even more interesting. There are actually two main ways digestion can happen: intracellular and extracellular.
Intracellular and extracellular. Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
All right, so intracellular digestion is kind of like an internal takeout service.
Internal takeout. Okay, now you're talking my language.
So imagine an amoeba, which is a single-celled organism.
Okay, it's a tiny little guy.
When it encounters food, it engulfs it through a process called phagocytosis, and this creates a little food vacuole inside the amoeba.
So it basically wraps the food in a tiny bubble inside its own body.
Exactly. And then digestive enzymes are released into this vacuole, breaking down the food into usable nutrients.
So the digestion happens inside the cell itself.
Precisely. And whatever's left over after the nutrients are absorbed gets ejected from the cell.
Wow, so it's like each individual cell has its own little digestive system.
Yeah.
Amazing. But you mentioned another type of digestion too, extracellular.
Yes. Extracellular digestion is more common in larger multicellular organisms like us humans.
So how does that work?
Instead of taking food directly into cells, we break it down outside of cells in a specialized compartment, the digestive tract.
Ah, so our digestive system is basically a separate compartment where food gets broken down before the nutrients are absorbed into our cell.
Precisely. It's a more complex system, but it allows us to process much larger quantities of food more efficiently.
Makes sense. I mean, we can eat a whole steak, but an amoeba can only engulf tiny particles.
Exactly. So our digestive system is really quite remarkable when you think about it.
It really is. And it makes me wonder, we've seen how different animals have adapted their feeding mechanisms to their environments. But what does the human digestive system tell us about our own evolutionary history? I mean, what were we originally meant to eat?
That's a question that has fascinated scientists for a long time. When we look at the human digestive system, we see some clues that point towards a diet that was originally rich in plant-based foods.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, for example, our intestines are proportionally longer than those of carnivores.
Longer intestines. What does that tell us?
It suggests that they evolved to break down fibrous plant material more effectively.
Makes sense. Plant fibers are definitely tougher to digest than meat. So having those longer intestines would give our bodies more time to extract all the nutrients.
Exactly. It's like having a longer assembly line to process all that plant-based goodness.
I like that analogy. So longer intestines for breaking down plants. What other clues are there?
Our teeth also tell a story. While we do have canines,
Yeah, those pointy ones?
they're not as prominent as those of true carnivores.
Interesting. So our teeth aren't really designed for tearing through meat like a lion or a wolf.
Right. On the other hand, our molars are well suited for grinding and crushing plant matter.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it seems like our ancestors probably ate a pretty diverse diet with a lot of plants and then some meat thrown in for good measure.
That's the general consensus among scientists.
It's fascinating how our anatomy still reflects that evolutionary history even after all this time.
It really is. And understanding this connection can give us some insights into how to nourish our bodies in a way that aligns with our biological design.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like we're designed to thrive on a certain type of fuel.
Huh.
Well, we've covered so much ground today. From the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs to those mind-blowing feeding mechanisms in the animal kingdom.
We've explored the intricate process of digestion.
From single-celled organisms all the way up to us complex humans.
And we even took a little trip back in time to explore our own evolutionary history.
It's amazing to think that all living things, despite their incredible differences, share this fundamental need for nutrients to survive.
We all gotta eat.
Or at least find a way to get those essential nutrients. It's like a giant interconnected web of life, all fueled by this need for energy.
Exactly. It's a beautiful and intricate system. And understanding these basic biological principles helps us appreciate the interconnectedness of all organisms on Earth.
Well said. I feel like I just aced a biology exam after that deep dive. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. And remember, the learning never stops. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep marveling at the wonders of biology.
Couldn't agree more. Until next time.